Assalamu alaikum again. Welcome to Parenting Hour. You're tuned into Unity FM 93.5 here in the heart of the city in Birmingham and 105.1 in Luton, and all our listeners are tuned in all over the country. Thank you for tuning into this Parenting Hour. My name is Kathleen Roche-Nagi, and as usual I'm here with you for the next hour, where we're going to be talking about another important topic for parents. It's not always that they be looking at this topic, but it is something that you'll need at some stage in your life when we're going to be looking at buying houses and where to buy, what to buy, what you should be looking out for before you buy a house, what you should know, understand the pitfalls that goes on. So we're going to start this as an introduction of series, because my guest actually is going to start his own show soon, and he'll be going into much more depth about each one of these problems in more depth with you. But I couldn't resist but having him on here the show this evening and welcome him to have him live here to kind of give us a general overview and introduction, especially with parents who get very stressed over this period of time trying to look for the right house, to know what is right for them and their family and their children. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Brother Azher Shareef. Assalamu alaikum, welcome.
Walaikum salam. All very nice to be back again. And thanks very much for your time, and I hope I can be of some benefit to somebody, and I look forward to maybe giving some information which may be useful.
You have a lot of information, and I know the last time we did a show, it was a good while ago now, a lot of people found it very beneficial. I don't know, there was lots of calls in afterwards about the show, and I think this is why you need to do your own show live, to actually be able to answer those calls and help people, whether it's in their private lives buying a house or a business or whatever, because I know you can do both, being a chartered surveyor and a chartered building engineer. Mashallah, look at all those qualifications. Mashallah.
Yeah, very easy. I think, if we can be of help to some people, I think it'd be very good.
Great.
In terms of whether you want to buy a house, whether you want to rent a house, pitfalls, type of surveys, what you need to do, when's the best time to buy a property. People would normally ask me, where's the best time? I mean, in reality, the best time to buy a property is now, really, when it suits you. There's no such thing as the best time, because no one can predict the market, and it's all about the buying. If the buying is done right, this is where we come in as chartered surveyors. In effect, we advise on what the property value should be, the issues, if there's any issues with the property. There's a lot of things that we need to be considered. You know, I've done this for around 30 years now, alhamdulillah.
Mashallah.
And I've done a few surveys in my time.
A few, I'm sure thousands of surveys, mashallah.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Great, wonderful. And indeed, you know, some of our parents I want to talk to also about are some of our courses that we're doing, because parents, usually when their families are expanding, that's when they're thinking of buying houses. But also we want to tell you of some of our programs, so that you are not missing out on your programs and getting to look after yourself. So if I just start with our pregnancy and beyond, we've got 2 courses, one in memorial surgery in Small Heath. That's a 4-week course. Although it's on Thursdays, we still have spaces there, so it's on Thursdays between 12:30 and 2:30. It's just about starting now, so we have plenty of spaces there, so please ring the studio or ring Approachable Parenting about that to get a place. And we have another one in the evening, another 4-week pregnancy and beyond course that is on in the boardroom at Approachable Parenting, and that's Friday evenings between 6 and 8 p.m. And that's starting the 29th of November. So for mums and dads to come together to learn the importance of parenting. So like buying a house, where this is you're buying your family home, parenting is something we should be educating ourselves about as well. And then we've got a few other ones, pregnancy to 3, all over Birmingham, with working with the children's centres. So there's a Hoda nursery, which is in I'm trying to look at the B10, and then there's Ladywood, that is B16, I believe, and then Bertram is coming up in B10 as well, and Fox Holly's coming up B27, and in other places. So again, if you want more information about those programs, which we have spaces on each one of them, there are 8-week programs that go from pregnancy right up to the age of 3. Please do ring us in and let us know about what program you'd like to be on. because we need to be looking at what's the best way and what's the best way of raising a child, as well as looking at the environment around and how I raise my child, how I raise my children. And that's why we go back to buying the house, because parents want to know what is the best house to buy in the best area maybe for my children. So what would you say, Azher, about this, about buying houses where parents are, maybe they've never bought a house before, pregnant now for the first time, very excited about this and want to buy a small family home?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you do is identify the property in terms of location, where you'd want to be, i.e. close to the amenities, schooling, public transport, and there's considerations that you'd want to consider, such as car parking. All these type of issues are quite important. That's the first things to consider. Secondly, you'd also be looking at price, what your price bracket is, whether you'd be buying it cash or whether you'd be buying it mortgage, arranging the funding. There's all types of funding out there. Some halal funding is also available, which is, you can look at that. People have different views on that, but the facility is available. So if you see a property, you'd normally go to the estate agent, look around, find a property, and you'd make an offer. And when you make an offer to an estate agent on a property, let's just say it's on for 150,000, someone would normally make an offer to the estate agent. They'd normally ask for proof of funding. Funding, whether it's cash or mortgage, they'd want to see that before accepting any formal offer. Really, from there on, you would need to get a survey done. Ideally, you don't have to get a survey done, but it's strongly recommended. There's various surveys you can get done. The most basic survey is like a valuation from a mortgage lender, which is really for the lender, it's not for the purchaser. So there's always some issues about the responsibility if there are any problems. Second type of survey, which is probably quite useful, is a home buyer report. Then thirdly is a structure report or a building survey, which is in depth. So there's all types of surveys you'd consider. So on making an offer to an estate agent, normally the offer is accepted, but it's always subject to contract. So you'd need to consider very carefully, because the average person out there is not a surveyor, is not expert in property, so you'd need to obtain an advice from an expert like a chartered surveyor who's a international recognised qualification throughout the world. Also holds indemnity insurance against any issues. So you would obtain a survey report. Let's just say you were buying it for £150,000, the initial offer to the estate agent. Let's just say that the surveyor picks up some faults, you get a structure report done and they've picked up some structural defects. There's a whole range of items that need to be considered in a survey. And normally the survey would pick up any detrimental, significant issues that would affect the market value. It's not every single item in a property, but really a surveyor would go out and look for the major issues. For example, if there was subsidence in the building, you could see the brick wall is falling down or some structural instability. The surveyor would normally give a specification of works and all that kind of stuff, and that could materially affect the market value of the property. So you could come back and with these defects and also the market value and the general economic conditions, it could be valued 125,000. Just because you've offered 150,000 initially doesn't mean you have to pay that price.
Okay, so you can go back again and say the survey told me this and this. Yeah,
of course. In fact, in reality, the estate agent would guide a property. It's a guide price, and you must remember the estate agent is employed by the vendor, the sellers, to obtain the maximum price in reality.
Right.
So you would consider getting a survey done to make sure you're buying the property at the right price, as well as the conditions.
Well as the conditions. So there's a lot there to think of. So this first you need to get a recognised surveyor, and that they need to be qualified and recognised. Do they have a stamp, or how do people go about knowing? Because I can imagine if you're doing this for the first time, you still maybe look it up in the you used to look up in the phone book before, but now you go online, don't you, and look it up, and all these names come in front of you. And it could be like me the other day. I was travelling to Ireland actually, and I thought I was on Ryanair website, and I realised only way too late, when the boarding pass wasn't coming and what's going on here, that I had actually gone in and paid through another website. And I did get the boarding pass in the end, which was only a few hours before travelling, so it was a bit of a stress there, because they only sent me one at a time, rather than when you usually can get your boarding pass for outward and inward journey, because it was only a short journey. They only sent me one at a time, so I didn't realise that, because it looked so authentic. It just looked like I was in Ryanair website, and I didn't know I wasn't until it was way down the line. So how could somebody that's not used to buying houses, click on something that comes up in front of them and then they're in the wrong site? How would they recognise they're in the right site?
That's a very good point there, Kathleen. Obviously, there's a lot of websites out there that sometimes portray themselves as the original, the official websites. I mean, I would say, with regards to the real estate or property, I would say you're looking for the RICS qualification, which is the main qualification, which stands for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. It takes around 7 years to get qualified, so from university, from A levels to university to
it's like a doctor.
Yeah, it's like a doctor. Well, we say we are property doctors. That's how I look at the RICS. There's also there's all types of surveyors. There's general practice surveyors that do valuation. There's building surveyors who concentrate more on the structural side, but there's some surveyors that can do both, just depending on experience. Also, there's other public bodies, professional bodies like chartered building engineers, which concentrate more on the structure angle side, which are engineers, and also civil engineers. So there's qualifications. Normally the most important thing you need to consider is, why would you pay a fee to someone to give you an opinion? Just like any other professional, you're being covered by professional indemnity, which is a requirement for professionals such as us, such as surveyors. Chartered surveyors. So
you have that symbol there and those marks, or ICS there, so that's the important thing to look for.
It looks like a lion. It's a purple lion.
Okay, a purple lion.
It's a purple lion.
And I should actually say also that I'm not actually promoting one airline over the other here, or false advertising here. So it could be the same with any other airlines that, or any other things actually, when you just Google it in the search box there, that something comes up. So you have a list of people that come up, and now you found somebody that has that line there, that has that symbol there, but there may be a list of many people. How would you choose between them then? What would your next step be? Really,
you could either contact the institution, who are based at Coventry or in London. You can go onto their website. If you just type in the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, it's got a list of qualified firms and surveyors, so you can double check that. You can also ask the firm, you can ask them to give you a quotation for the type of survey you require. It's always important to try to explain exactly by email, by way of an instruction, as to what you're looking for. Are you more interested in the valuation, or are you more interested in a building survey? They're different things. Or do you want them combined? So that's what you need to do in terms of buying a property. And you're more than welcome to shop around like you would anywhere else. You don't have to pay the fee that they say, but like anywhere else, you get the most competitive quote with someone who's got some good relevant experience.
And I suppose maybe even going one step back further before we find that house now, because we found probably a surveyor, but before we found the house, people get very confused to looking at houses as to know, is it the area I should be looking at, or is it the house size I should be looking at? Because everybody wants the most for their money. Yeah, we're all wanting the best for our money, best value for our money, really. But that's not. They're different, aren't they? They are different. Sometimes you get a really small house, but it's in a very prominent area that you may get, if you're reselling it later on, get money back or even make a profit on it. And other times you might get a big house, but it's in a different area that doesn't cost as much, but the prices may not increase as much if you're selling it on later on.
I think it's a very good question. It's not very straightforward, Kathleen. But
Sorry, my questions are always complicated.
But it's a very good question. It's a very good question. I mean, it all comes down to personal choice and what you're looking for. I mean, are you buying for investment purposes? Are you buying to live there? If you're buying to live there, you would be close to some schooling. Schooling is very important. The amenities,
especially for our parents.
Yeah, and
close to children's centres, close to facilities, close maybe to hospitals.
That's right.
Bus routes or whatever that can take them to these places. Yeah,
absolutely. So if you wanted a bigger house, you can go into a probably further away. It's a very, very. There's no wrong and right answer in this one. It's very, very personal. If someone needs 5 bedrooms, they'll probably have to go to a area which is probably cheaper, but it really depends on the individual. There's no wrong and right answer in reality, but I would always say try to buy something with potential. That's probably one of the critical points I would consider when I'm looking at real estate, any property. Just see if you can potentially do a loft conversion. You could ask the surveyor for that, so potentially you could increase the size that way. Also on the side next door, is any land available, just by looking at the property itself to determine whether you can expand in the future. And that's what the way I'd answer that question.
Yeah, so looking at potential, so maybe the loft, it may be going out the back with an extension, or the front, it may be converting the garage, it could be a conservatory. So something that you could actually do over time to make it profitable for you. And I suppose that looking at the land next door that you could buy, but also thinking maybe somebody else might buy, or somebody might put a factory on it. This is one reason you'd probably employ a surveyor. Sometimes if you buy in a mixed commercial area, sometimes the surveyor, especially your lawyer, would advise if there's any CPO, compulsory purchase orders, and that's more the legality side. But one thing I'd also mention at this stage, depending on the purchaser, if the purchaser is a cash buyer, they're always in a very strong position. They can normally buy the property from anybody with an estate agent at a bit of a discounted price, because it's a bit of in this market conditions, it's a very, very good asset to be buying cash. You can normally get a good discount on the purchase of any property. So that's quite helpful. Cash is really king, definitely in this game. Great. So it may be that you might start off, even though you have a small bottle of cash, and it might be for some of our couples that are pregnant, for example, and that are going to come on in our pregnancy and beyond courses, are starting in the next few weeks, and learn about that as well. But they might start in a flat, for example, a small flat somewhere, because they could have that cash, you're saying, and start there and start building their family in that.
Yeah, of course. And there's also the opportunity for a lot of people out there for council right to buy, where they've been living in council houses for some time. They've got the right to get, very good discounts, up to 30-40% discounts on the purchase price, buying back from the council. And it's normally quite easy to arrange funding for that. And it's a very good way for people to get onto the property ladder. So that's very, very good point you made there. About small flats or houses. But if you've ever got the opportunity to buy, you must buy. That's what I would say. Buy when you can. It's a good investment.
What about, and in your experience, have you come across like a couple of families come together? I'm thinking of not strangers, so maybe 2 brothers coming together to get on the property ladder because they've never been on the property ladder, and this is new for them, and they just want to get the foot in. What do you think of that situation? Is that easy, or does that have more problems down the line? What advice would you give?
I think it all comes down to one thing called money. I think it's all cash flow. I mean, it's a good idea if the brothers get on. There's no reason why they couldn't buy a house together in joint names, and they could potentially. You may need planning permission, but you could potentially. One person could take the ground floor, the other brother could take the first floor. So there's options like that. At least you get you on the property ladder. But these are good options that you could consider.
And then they could move on after that as their families are growing. I'm sure there's other options to think about.
I mean, the first thing, it'd be good to get onto the property ladder however you can. And just so you got a bit of a track record, and it gives you confidence and you understand the processes, how it would work. Yeah, that's a good idea, I think. Very good idea to get onto the property ladder by sharing because everything you need to do probably has to be done properly and legally, especially with families.
Of course. And if you had to go for a mortgage, is there a percentage of deposit that you need to have in cash?
Yeah, nowadays they're quite stricter than they were previously. I would say that normally, depending on your income, you'd normally be needing to put down anywhere between 5% and say 30% normally. That's what you'd be looking at, depending on the mortgage provider and the income. It's really based on the status of your income,
To 30%, that's quite a lot actually, maybe for some people.
Yeah, for some people it may be, but again, it depends on the credit rating of one. And that's the worse the credit rating, the higher the percentages normally. But the stable job is the most critical point here.
So stable job and then credit rating. Can you just describe credit rating or explain it a little bit more for credit rating? Because some people may never have had a credit card, may never have bought things on credit, may not know that exists, may dealing, a lot of our Muslim community deal with cash and still deal with cash. So what is credit rating? Yeah,
credit rating really is, if for instance you've ever had any issues in the past, if you've had your house repossessed, or you've had a county court judgment in court, you've had a dispute with somebody, so this can affect your credit rating in quite a serious way, which would affect your ability to obtain mortgage funding and similar items. So that would affect you. So that's something to consider. So it's rating. And would that be affected, say, if somebody bought a car or something and didn't pay off payments? Yeah, it's similar. Car? It's similar. It'd be end of the day, it'd be coming back as a county court judgment potentially. Because the first thing any lender would do, anyone that provides any form of credit, they would look at the history, and nowadays within seconds the lenders would know within seconds what your complete credit file, whether you're classed as a high risk or a low risk. It's really as simple as that. It could be something as simple as a £2,000 county court judgment where you haven't paid a bill. Sometimes you don't even know. Someone may send you a summons and you haven't received it, and when it comes to getting a mortgage, in fact it's quite common.
Really? Is it?
Yeah, it's quite common. Yeah, it's a good point you mentioned, because there may be a £500 payment that you haven't paid, and it's on your credit file, and that can stop you getting a mortgage.
Wow. Yeah. And once you pay off that £500 or whatever it is, would that be taken off your credit history then?
Yeah, it all depends normally on the timing, but you'd pay it off, get a satisfaction letter, then you'd go back to the lender, then really it's down to the lender's discretion as to what they would do in terms of the funding side.
Okay, because I've heard of somebody telling me that the advice they got one time when they were buying a house, they never had a credit card in their life, and they were advised to take out a credit card, buy something on it, pay it off, so you have a history that you actually are you're good at credit.
Oh, that's a very good point. Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, but I think the other way of doing it is just need proof of where you live. For example, you should be on the electoral roll. Is probably one of the best ways to prove. Get yourself, and the elections are coming up now, so get yourself registered, and that's probably the best thing you could do. Yeah, it's proof of where you live. That's in reality.
So that's what people want to know before they look at this. So it's important to get that money bit ready. So listeners, if you are thinking of buying, it's something to think about, to see have you got any outstanding bills, and if you've never been registered before, make sure you're on the electorate. We should all be voting anyway, and it's the right. Well, gosh, the poor women fought for this 100 years ago. So especially if women are listening there, please make sure you're on the electorate to and use your vote. And from there you can build then that at least the financial bit is okay, and you can proceed that way. So we know that now you've got the finance sorted out, now you're looking in the different areas, and as we mentioned earlier on, it could be that you want a bigger house in an area because you have lots of children, and you may think of later on down the line moving from that house to another house in a different area, but you want to get started somewhere. Or you may want a smaller little patch, a little flat, just to get started with as well, and then think I'm going to move later on into something else. So just think of where you want that house. I know when we see these programs on TV, we often hear of it, location. But that is, as you said, very subjective to the person, because the person may want to live next door to their mum, their father. So their location is in that street. That's where I want to be. So that's the important location. So although the programs go and they talk about schools and public transport and all of this, it may not be there. It may be that there's a house next door to your mum, and I want to buy that house next door to my mum because I want my mum to help me when I've had the baby, and I want to be close by. buy, or I'm helping her. As Muslim families, we do this.
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, in fact, I've seen in my time in this, as an estate agent in the past, you'd find, especially in some of the Asian areas, people would want to live close to their family, and they'd pay a premium, sometimes paying above market value. So if you're a purchaser, sometimes if you're buying from an estate agent, it's best probably not to tell them exactly. I mean, we have to be honest, but there's no point in telling the potential seller that you're buying it because your family's next door, because they can ask another 10%. So that's something just to consider, really.
Sometimes keep your cards in your pocket. We're coming to a commercial break already. How quickly the time goes. So thank you so much for talking and explaining that to us. We'll have lots of more questions to ask afterwards. And listeners, as I mentioned earlier on, we've got 2 Pregnancy and Beyond courses starting. Please give the studio a ring if you want to find out more information about that, and they'll pass them out to you, or ring us on Approachable Parenting at Approachable Parenting also, and we'll give you more information about that. We've a lot more to talk about buying houses, where to go, what to do, what you should be doing, what you should be looking out for. So do join us after this commercial break, inshallah, where we'll be coming back to you and discussing this in more detail. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Parenting Hour. You're tuned in to Unity FM 93.5, and I think down south 105.1, and I know there's some other stations also taking this program. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you're having a good day, inshallah, and that everything is going well for you, inshallah, and you are there with your families and enjoying every day that comes, spending the most of your time, quality time together, learning tools and skills to help your family to enjoy that time, to enjoy small activities together, to learn how you can build their confidence, self-esteem, build baby brains, as we say. Brain development with babies is so important. We know from pregnancy right up to the age of 2 now is a crucial age in a child's life, and lots of problems later on in life actually impact on those times. And we get clients over and over again that have issues in adulthood, that when we reflect back, it's because of issues in those times, that not having a secure attachment with their parents, etc. So we need to develop that pregnancy to 3 better and make sure that we're looking after our children, inshallah. So not just doing the outward things, what we're talking about today, buying houses, but also having the inside of the home fun and attractive, etc., for everybody, inshallah, and a place to be able to raise up your children. And I've been talking about some programs we have on offer at the moment. There's a lot of them on offer. Do go onto our Approachable Parenting Facebook or Instagram page to see everything, or give us a ring and either in the studio or at Approachable Parenting, which is 0121 773 8643. Now, I'll go back to my guest I have here in the studio, because we've been talking a lot about buying houses. This is Brother Azher Shareef, who is a chartered surveyor and building engineer, mashallah. And we've been talking about buying houses and where to buy it and the best property to have. And we were talking a bit about finance and where to go to have finance, and that credit rating as well. Before we go any further, I want to kind of give our listeners a little bit of a picture of what they should be looking out for when they're doing these viewings for property. So you have a list of properties, you kind of know the area, because I'm attracted to this area either because I like the area, or it's got good schools, or I've got Muslim relatives nearby, so I know this area, so I want something in this area. But what should they be looking out for when they step across the front door, step across the threshold? Is there smells? Is there things that they can see? Is there telltale signs that they actually should be noting from the time they step into that house?
Oh, that's great. That's a good question. Very good question. 7 years, I think, of study would summarise that. But I mean, some of the things that are common sense. You could walk in, if you can smell dampness, normally you could see moulding and all that kind of stuff. You get a feeling, depending on the age of the property, determines the type of survey that you'd need potentially. But even if you were just looking at yourself as a layman, you look at the roof. Generally, that's what a surveyor would look at. If it's bowing, if it's tilting, you'd look at the walls, if there's any kind of cracking anywhere. That's from the outside. You look at the windows above the door heads, all these type of things a surveyor would consider. You look on the outside, then you look at the damp-proof course to see the levels, external levels, and how it sounds. That's what a surveyor, I'm going back to the surveyor, but as a layman, you'd walk into the property. If you saw major cracking, then there's a problem somewhere. But there's certain things that surveyors are actually trained to find which are not very visible to the naked eye sometimes. Normally,
But sorry, I was going to say, but there are some things that could be picked up beforehand. So, because you're paying a surveyor, you don't want to pay him for 10 properties. You want to have some basic knowledge, as you say. You want the smells that might be sticking out, or the big cracks on the wall, or the tiles, the roof that is not, there's broken tiles. So you need to be thinking of some things when you're going in.
I mean, one of the most common defects, depending on the age, normally older properties tend to have a problem with the damp-proof course. Where there's dampness, you could normally smell that, which you'd see mould. Sometimes not just rising dampness, it could be lack of ventilation. So sometimes not just rising dampness, it could be just due to simple lack of ventilation in the bathroom, in the kitchen sometimes. So it's always good to keep the properties ventilated. When you walk on the timber flooring, if it's timber flooring, there's two types of flooring. Generally it's timber, or it could be a solid concrete. And if you're springing, if you jump up and down on the, well, don't jump too hard, you might go through, but if you do, then you've done your survey. But you need to use really common sense. And if you find a lot of springing the floorboards and all that kind of stuff, but I would really say leave it to the professionals. It's worth a fee. I mean, when you look at, if you're paying, say, £100,000, £150,000 on average for a property, on a survey you'd be paying probably around £500. I think it's a very good investment, and it's very important, just like buying a car. When you buy a car, you tend to have a service history, and nowadays, even with a house, you have to get EPCs, the energy assessment reports. All these type of things are important. So really, by getting a survey done, it really builds up a service history. If there's ever an issue, even if you get a survey done, there's no issues, and you've bought the property, but then sometimes there may be subsidence. The first thing an insurance company would do is ask for evidence that you've had a survey that the problem wasn't there before you'd bought it. So sometimes people don't see that, but there's a lot of issues, and that's a very important point to consider. So really, I would say, using common sense, making sure you'd go out, have a look, make sure you're happy with the property generally, but then I would say go for that survey. I think it's a no-brainer.
So the survey is really important, but if you were kind of looking at 10 houses to pin it down to that one that would be best for you, I mean, it might be that the worst one is really the one you want, but if you had a choice of 10 houses in a street, for example, and you wanted to pin down to just paying for the one fee, you'd be looking at the windows, what kind of windows are in it? Are they double glazed or not double glazed? Is there dampness there? Is the tiles okay? Is there any leaks coming down the walls from rain?
That's a good question again, but what I would do, I wouldn't look at the condition. If it was 10, because generally speaking, if you had 10 houses in the same road, say, I wouldn't try to be a surveyor and try to choose what you need to do is choose the one that suits you and your family. In terms of the price initially, the price, because you can estimate how much work to do, roughly speaking, a new kitchen, bathroom, windows. Normally, if the property's in bad condition, normally that's an advantage for someone who's moving in, because they can redecorate the house, refurbish their property into their specification, how they like it. So sometimes, whether a house is half damaged or fully damaged, I personally would always go for the fully damaged one. You get it cheaper, and there's more chance to make a developer's profit. What that is, in effect, if you spend, say, £50,000 on refurbishing a property, you can normally add on 20-30% as your profit for doing the work if you do it at the right price, generally. So I would say, if you had 10 houses, choose the best one that suits you and your family. Then that's the way you would go, and from there you can't get 10 surveys done. You'll be making surveyors very rich. We can't have that wouldn't be right. But choose the one that suits you. That's what I would say. Then get the survey done.
And then get the survey done. Is there much of a waiting list for service? Are they surveyors? Are they very busy that you have to keep waiting for months, or would it be weeks?
No, normally you can get surveys done within days.
Within days? Oh, great.
Within days. Some firms say a week, depending how busy they are. But generally speaking, you're looking at about a week. The turnaround time is normally 7 days after inspection. You'd normally get the report back.
Oh, very good. Very good. And that's the report. And as you say, that report is vital, not just for your knowledge and peace of mind that you've bought the right thing, but later on down the line, if something did happen, your insurance company would need to see this. So it is valuable for you then to have.
Absolutely. It's very, very important for a lot of reasons. And you just rightly say is that it gives a service history. You want to build up a service history on the house, just like a car. And it always makes it easier to sell, resellability. That's the other thing to consider when you buy a property. I mean, for instance, if a house has had underpinning or structural repairs done, that always has quite a impact on the resellability of a property. For instance, if you buy a property which looks good, but it's had structural problems with it in the past, but which have been repaired, sometimes it can affect the market value by as much as 20%. So you need to be aware of issues like that, which your surveyor would point out to you.
Surveyor would know all of these things.
That's right. And the other thing is, a lot of time people would instruct a solicitor, a conveyancing solicitor, before a surveyor. But I personally feel that before you even go to a solicitor, because as soon as you instruct a solicitor, you'll be paying them a deposit. You can be paying up to around £800 to £1,000 to purchasing a property. I think it's best to really check the property out first via a surveyor. Then once you've agreed a price, then give it to the solicitor, because normally you can get, people are more concerned about the going to a solicitor straight away, but I think it's really getting the price agreed properly before you move forward.
Right, so
that could save you some money.
That saves money, and that's you and the estate agent agreeing on a price.
Yeah. Normally that's what would happen. The surveyor would do the survey on behalf of the purchaser, and that's what would happen. You'd agree, and they would show to the estate agent if there's a reduction in the price. The estate agent would have to speak to the vendor or the seller and agree, because they don't have to drop on the price. It's really a very personal choice. If the estate agent can only advise the seller, but it's up to them whether they want to sell. If they're insistent on a price, they don't have to reduce their price. So there's always a risk when you do get a survey done that the seller doesn't decrease the price, if that's an issue.
Right. Gosh, there's a lot to think about there, but it's really good to get that survey in first and get to know before you pay out waste of money maybe to anybody else, that you're getting the right place, the right thing that you're wanting to buy. Wonderful. And so what else would we need to be kind of looking at? So we're looking at those things in the house. So we're looking at the dampness, the smells, the floorboards. We're just having a little jump on them, a very light little jump on them, see they okay. And then the walls. And would people, if they wanted to, or how would they get the knowledge of kind of maybe thinking, they might be thinking, I'm going to extend it this way. Would they be able to do it themselves? Is this a structural war, or is this I don't know the terminology now. You need to help me here.
I know exactly. It's very good. In fact, we're quite commonly asked on this point when we do a survey. The purchaser would want to consider certain items like a potential loft conversion to see whether the roof timbers are high enough, whether it's suitable for a loft conversion, or also whether an extension to the rear, to the side. Really, the survey could give guidance, but strictly, well, you need planning permission anyway before you did anything in reality. But sometimes you can extend a certain amount. They call it permitted development, which is a development you can do without planning permission, but you still need building regulation approval. But the survey would guide you on all these kind of issues. I mean, we're talking about going to an estate agent, but the other way of obviously buying properties is going through an auction.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, auction is also an interesting one. I mean, really the auction, in theory, you should be buying the property around, could be, from my experience, 10-20% below market value. But again, you've got to be very careful, because as soon as that, if you bid for a property without doing any research, you can get your fingers burnt. You could be losing a lot of money. I've had instances whereby people have bought at auction and they've realised the property wasn't freehold, it was leasehold. So they've paid an extra £50,000. I had an incident recently, which was only about 8 months ago, one of the Birmingham auctions, whereby someone paid £200,000 for the property, and in reality the valuation of the property was only £100,000, so they lost £100,000.
Oh
Yeah,
dear,
so you've got
something to be
yeah,
aware of.
Very,
Yeah.
very, very careful. In fact, even someone I know recently, only 3 months ago, they bought a property locally. And the other thing you need to watch out for when you're buying a property from auction, I think we need a separate program just on auctions.
I think we have to, yes.
Because it's very important, because I mean, from my experience again, someone bought this property, an educated chap, and he bought the property for £100,000. Then on top of that, he had to pay an auctioneer's fees of £15,000.
Wow.
Oh, so you've got to be very careful, and especially with the online estate agents as well, auctioneers.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of pitfalls. So sometimes you think you're getting a bargain, but get the right advice. Pay the fee to the surveyor. Get it all checked out. I mean, with an auction, as soon as the hammer drops, you have to sign the contracts. Normally, pay 10% deposit. Could be more, could be less, depending on the conditions. But that's something you really have to look out for. So I've seen in my past time a lot of people losing a lot of money, which is, very, very disappointing.
Wow, and of course we don't often see that on under the hammer programs like this. We just see the positive stories. We don't see the losses there. So you need to do your research on that. You need to be aware of what is the auctioneer taking, how much do you need to pay to them, as well as, and do you have to have the cash, or how you're going to get the money up front to pay that deposit there and then.
Yeah, I mean, the risks, just going back to the auction, if the hammer drops, you pay your, say, 10% deposit. Say you're buying a house for 100,000, you put £10,000, people tend to get surveys done afterwards. We tend to get calls, can we do an emergency survey? And we'll come out and there's a lot of issues, and sometimes they'll lose their 10% deposit. And it's very, very serious, because the sellers could chase them for any shortfall in any future sales. So it's an ongoing process, something to really consider.
So do your work there, listeners. If you are thinking, yes, you can get good value for money and there's good houses there in the auction, but you really need to do your work beforehand and get advice and get your survey in beforehand, so you know what you're buying if you are going down an auction. So yeah, we have the estate agent and we have the auction for houses. Is there any other way you can buy houses? Yeah,
sometimes is by tender. Okay. Sometimes an estate agent, it's still through an estate agent, but sometimes there's a lot of demand on a property. So what they'll do is put a guide price sometimes of a property, and a lot of people would give sealed bids, which is always a bit, which is always something you need to consider very, very carefully, because you could be paying way above the odds. But again, if there's such a high demand, sometimes you'll exceed the market value and you'll make a sealed bid, and an estate agent will tell you if you're successful. But again, it's normally under strict conditions. Yeah. So something to consider. It's not, a tender is not really the way. They tend to use it more for commercial property, I would say. But sometimes it's there for houses.
I think in Scotland they use some sort of a system like that, if I'm right. So our listeners would probably know and ring us in and correct us indeed. But yes. I remember there was something in the sealed envelope up there that they do. Yeah, which sounds similar indeed. Yeah. Great. So we have the house. We know how to buy it. We've looked at things inside the house. What about outside the house? The garden, the boundaries. How do we know about what should we be buying? Where our boundaries are? How are we going to find out that?
Okay, Kathleen, that's a really good one. You just hit a really hot topic, which is boundary disputes. Now, we have done quite a few boundary disputes over our time. People have a lot of issues sometimes with boundaries. The next door will, and no doubt this will correspond to a lot of people. I think we've had a lot of issues with boundaries. Some people, the neighbour would build up a fence, for instance, then they're encroaching on their land, then it becomes very personal. And we've done quite a few of these recently, and we're still doing them even today. So when you do get your survey done, the surveyor should point out if there are any issues with the boundary, and they'll normally guide the solicitors to look into further detail. Even with people who have got boundary issues, it's a very, very complicated area and can be very expensive, and normally becomes a very personal issue. And that's what I've tend to found in my experience. But what I would say is, if you have a boundary, try to stay on good terms with your neighbour. But normally the process is getting a surveyor in. I don't think you need to instruct a solicitor straight away, because at the end of the day, the solicitor will come back to a surveyor to ascertain where the boundary lines are, which is a much cheaper and cost-effective way of doing it. because the bottom line is we need to agree where the boundaries are. Surveyors are trained, boundary wall surveyors, party wall surveyors, they're trained to ascertain where boundaries are, but sometimes it's a grey area, so two surveyors would need to agree. But this is something to consider.
So there might be some markets, like I'm thinking at home of my house and the boundary, and I know there's still a post there. So we bought it many years ago, but there's still a plank of wood painted white on the top that shows because there's actually nothing between that part between the neighbours and ourselves. So it's just this plank of wood with it painted white. So in some houses, I presume that plank of wood is not there. So it's just open. How to know? It's difficult.
Yeah, and really it's difficult. And normally you'd get land registry plans starting point. Sometimes you could look at the deeds and try to ascertain. But the problem is sometimes the lines are quite thick. If you look at the land registry plans, normally a scale of 1 to 1250, and you'd have to ascertain exactly. Sometimes you can't get it exactly right, but you can get a good idea. So really, if any issues, try to get a surveyor in as soon as possible to ascertain it, because sometimes I've seen quite a few big disputes. It becomes very personal. So get the surveyor in and try to sort it out as soon as possible.
Yeah, boundaries, I know from previous work I did a long time ago, where as a community mediator we were often brought in because of disputes over boundaries, and actually even trees, because especially these land trees that grow up so tall that people say that they shade off my light, or they've come over into my part of the garden, and they're yours and they're mine, or whatever. There's been dispute over that as well.
That the trees normally we've had that recently also. I think normally you just talk to your neighbours, do it in a friendly manner. Normally if it's hanging over your side, you are entitled to cut them, but it's nice to talk to the neighbour than just doing it, because that's what I find. It normally becomes a personal issue more than anything else. A simple chat, just bear respect to the neighbour.
Indeed, that would be great. Well, there's a lot there to buy in a house, isn't there? And I think we need to do definitely more programmes about this and talk about it more. We're coming towards the end of today's show, which goes very quickly, and talk about this. So is there any top tips you can give for today's show?
I would just say that very, very simply, I mean, buying a property is very simple if you follow the correct procedures. Do not take shortcuts. Get a professional to do what they're trained to do, and they can guide you all the way, really, and that's the best advice I can really give.
Wonderful. And I know we're going to have you back more, and you're going to do your own show, and we're going to be talking much more about this in depth. So taking it stage by stage and helping people as they're planning to buy their house, which is information that everybody needs, and maybe even it's not even for yourself, you can pass it on to others. So please do listen in, listeners, to these programmes. Inshallah, Brother Azher will be doing his own show. It'll be out advertised. We'll get a time, and I'll be telling you about it on my show as well, when the time is and the day are, so you'll be prepared to be able to tune into it. And of course, don't forget, if you're pregnant, pass on the message as well. We've got 2 Pregnancy and Beyond courses, one in memorial surgery that's on at the moment on Thursdays 12:30 to 2:30, and one starting in George Street on Friday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. and there's spaces on both of those courses, as well as the children's centres ones up and down Birmingham, all around Birmingham, pregnancy to 3. We want you to know about how to raise your children and get it right from the start as well. So it's not just getting the right house from the start, but getting the right family approach from the start, and all those techniques inshallah. So please do ring us if you need any further information. And until next week, have a great week, inshallah. Look after yourselves and happy house hunting. Assalamu alaikum.
هذه الدنيا الجميلة بين قفر وخميلة والسماوات صقيلة كلها من صنع ربي النجوم الزاهرات والبدور النيرات والضحى والظلمات كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي on l'aime tellement. Regarde nos corps, tous et toutes dans l'univers l'implore pour son aide. Toutes les étoiles, tous les cieux, on les voit, ça nous emplit du bonheur. Ensuite nous chantons pour l'amour de sa création. Yeah, and every day we thank him, alhamdulillah, so many praises. Send peace and blessings to the best of creation, Muhammad. He's our prophet and savior. Gotta recognize what the Lord's given. Gardens under rich rivers flow, dripping. These are all gifts, so let's go get them. Brothers and sisters around the world singing like كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي جمل الكون ببحري وبواد تحت نهري وبأشجار وزهري كلها من صنع ربي وحباه بجبال كاسيات بالجلال مشرقات بالجمال كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي كلها من صنع ربي
Yekusama, Yekusama.